The marble floor was so cold it burned. She knelt there, mud still caked under her fingernails, her wrapper tied in a desperate hurry, her knees screaming through the thin fabric, and watched the phone cameras rise like weapons. 1, 2, 3. More. Record her, someone whispered. This is gold. The security guard's handprint still glowed red on her forearm, fresh as a brand. He'd pushed her at the revolving doors not 5 minutes ago. This is not a market, madam. Stop dragging drama into our building. But she didn't leave. She couldn't. Because the wallet in her trembling hands, the brown leather one with initials pressed so faint they were almost secret, belonged to the man upstairs. Her husband. A woman in a pencil skirt leaned toward a man in a blazer. Their lips pressed together like children trying not to laugh. The sound that escaped was vicious. Please, she said, and the single word hurt more than any bruise. I only want to return his wallet. Whose wallet? The receptionist's smile had sharpened into something cruel. My husband's. The lobby erupted. Laughter struck like thrown pebbles, each one finding the soft places in her heart. Someone's phone flash went off. Someone else whispered, "Is she serious?" The uniformed guard rolled his eyes so hard she thought they might stick that way. The marble beneath her felt less like a floor and more like a stage, and she was the joke performing itself. This was Lagos. The Victoria Island glass tower where the air conditioning cost more than her annual rent. Where people wore watches that could buy villages. Where a woman in a wrapper, traditional cloth wrapped hastily around her waist, did not belong. Could not belong. Stand up and leave, the guard said, his voice rehearsed and remote. This is a professional environment. She lifted the wallet higher, as if it might speak for her. The initials caught the light, so faint, almost apologetic. Inside were cards she'd never seen before. A metal access badge. A photograph of this very building with its mirrored windows throwing the sun back at the sky like an insult. And a name. A name she had heard whispered in the dark, a name her husband answered to only when he thought she was sleeping. When she'd found the wallet on their kitchen table that morning, back in the village, in their one-room house with the corrugated roof, her hands had started shaking. Not from anger. From recognition. The kind you feel when you finally see the shape of a lie you've been living inside. My husband, she repeated, and gave them his village name. The one the elders called him by. The one his mother used. Nothing. No recognition. Just more snorts, more whispers, more phones rising like a flock of mechanical birds. She swallowed metal and disinfectant. The glass doors sighed behind her as people came and went, cold air licking at her damp collarbone. Around her, the lobby gleamed, all chrome and light and the kind of order that made people like her feel like stains. People call him by different names, she said quietly, and gave them the other one. The one from the card. The one she'd never heard him answer to in 6 months of marriage. That name traveled through the lobby like a spark through dry grass. Faces changed. The receptionist's mouth opened. The guard's chin lifted. The pencil-skirt woman's eyes flashed with something alive and sharp and knowing. Who are you to him? The guard asked carefully, his voice suddenly different, cautious, almost respectful. His wife. 3 seconds of silence. Then the lobby erupted again, but different this time. Not amused. Shocked. Hungry. Phones rose higher. Someone tugged at the frayed hem of her wrapper. Someone else touched her hair like she was a curious animal. The laughter now had teeth. The guard's voice rose above it all. This is a professional environment. Please stand and exit the premises immediately. Her body shook. She tried to rise and her right knee screamed, pain streaking white through her vision, taking her back to the village. To heat and soil and sunlight. To the first week she'd arrived, to the blisters the hoe had carved into her soft palms, to the ache under her shoulder blade when she lifted water because the pump was far, to mosquito songs at night and a mattress that sank like old bread. She had left everything for him. Her badge at the hospital. Her uniforms. Her winter coat. Her car. Her comfortable life in Minneapolis where snow fell in patient threads and people wrapped their mouths with scarves to speak. She'd left a job, a salary, friends who smelled like coffee and antiseptic, an apartment with heat that worked and water that ran hot without begging. She'd left all of it for a man who whispered promises in the dark and wore a secret life like a second skin. And now he was late. The elevator numbers climbed. 15, 16, 17. People on their phones, people checking their watches, people pretending not to stare at the woman on her knees in traditional cloth, her knees bruised purple through the thin wrapper, her palms scraped raw, her eyes wet with tears she hadn't given permission to fall. How long has she been here? someone asked. 15 minutes, the receptionist replied, her voice now tinged with something like concern. Or entertainment. The line was blurry. 20 minutes. The wallet grew heavier in her hands. She could feel the weight of her choices pressing down, every decision that had led her to kneel on cold marble in front of strangers. Every sacrifice. Every whispered promise. Every moment she'd believed him when he said, "Come with me. I know it's not American comfortable, but it's real." Real. The word tasted like rust now. The guard shifted his weight. Someone's phone notification pinged. The air conditioning hummed its mechanical song, and she knelt there, a woman between worlds, belonging to neither, watched by everyone, known by no one. And then, the elevator dinged. Footsteps. Quick, purposeful. The kind that made people turn. The kind that commanded the air to rearrange itself. He emerged in a suit the color of smoke, and everything changed. If this moment shocks you, wait till you hear why she left her country for love, why she chose a warehouse over Minneapolis, why she knelt instead of ran, why she stayed when every instinct screamed to leave. Hit the like button and stay with me till the end. This is just the beginning. The diner smelled like coffee that had been burned and reheated too many times. The kind of coffee that tasted like the night shift itself. Bitter, resilient, tired but still trying. She moved between tables with the practiced grace of someone who'd learned to carry weight without showing the strain. 4 months at this job. 2 jobs, actually. The hospital nights, the diner mornings. Her feet had forgotten what rest felt like. She was not dramatic. She was the opposite of dramatic. She was a woman who showed up, did her work, and disappeared into the quiet of her efficiency. The other nurses called her steady. Her manager called her reliable. Her mother called her and asked, "Sweetheart, are you eating?" As if worry could be transmitted through phone lines and absorbed by force of will alone. It was a winter afternoon when he walked in. The snow was falling outside in patient threads, the kind that doesn't rush. People wrapped their mouths with scarves to speak, their words emerging like smoke. The diner was half full, construction workers nursing coffee, an elderly couple sharing pie, a student with textbooks scattered like fallen leaves. He came through the door with cold on his eyelashes and warmth in his presence, the way some people carry their own weather. He was not traditionally handsome. His face was thoughtful, high cheekbones, a jaw that worked hard, hands that looked like they'd built things. He wore a warehouse uniform under his coat, the kind with a company logo embroidered small, as if apologizing for taking up space. His name tag said warehouse assistant. Nothing more. He sat at the counter. She brought him coffee without asking, the way you do for people who look like they need it. When she set it down, their fingers almost touched, and she felt the small electricity of it, the kind you ignore because it happens 1,000 times a day to people in service jobs. "Thank you," he said softly, and the word carried a weight that suggested he meant it for more than coffee. She moved on. Tables to clear. Orders to take. A kitchen that demanded speed. But she found herself returning to his section more than necessary. Refilling his cup though it wasn't empty. Asking if the sandwich was okay though she already knew it was. Noticing the book he'd brought, something on supply chain management, dog-eared and underlined in careful pencil. He came back the next day. And the day after. On the 3rd day, he ordered scrambled eggs and toast, and she brought them. The milk steamer shrieked, that terrible, metal-on-metal wail they all hated, and she flinched. Her arm caught the steam. The burn came quick and hot, a red welt blooming across her forearm like a terrible flower. She gasped. Pressed her arm against her body. Tried to keep moving because the shift didn't pause for pain. He reached across the counter. He didn't ask permission. He just reached, his hand steady and sure, and took her burned arm gently. He found a napkin, filled it with ice from the service station, and pressed it against the welt. The cold punched up her skin, and the pain softened into a different kind of ache. "Hold it there," he said, and his voice was like hands steadying a trembling thing. She looked at his face. Really looked. His eyes were the color of earth after rain. His expression held no judgment, no mockery, no self-consciousness about the intimacy of the gesture. They stood like that for what felt like a long time. The diner moved around them, orders called, coffee poured, the cash register singing its small commercial song. But in their small space, time moved differently. "Thank you," she whispered. "I hate that this hurt you," he said, and she believed him. His name was F. He told her over the next few weeks, slowly, the way you reveal something precious. He was studying supply chain management at a community college, attending evening classes after warehouse shifts. He'd come to Minneapolis 3 years ago with a dream and a single suitcase. He worked nights repairing forklifts at a warehouse because the pay was better and the hours were flexible. He lived in a small apartment with 2 roommates. He had a mother back home who sold fish at the market. He had a father who had died when he was 12. He told her these things while sitting at the counter during her morning breaks. Over cheap noodles at his kitchen table late at night when she finished her hospital shift. In text messages that arrived at 3 a.m. when they were both awake, her in scrubs, him in a warehouse vest, each unable to sleep, each drawn to the other like a compass finding true north. She told him about her childhood in a small town where ambition felt like vanity. About putting herself through nursing school while her mother cleaned houses. About the loneliness that came with being too independent, with always being the strong one, with never quite knowing how to let someone else hold the weight. You don't have to be strong all the time, he told her one night, his head on her shoulder, his hand finding the scar tissue of her overworked heart. I don't know how to be anything else, she admitted. Then I will be strong for the parts of you that are tired, he said. And you can rest. She had never let anyone say that to her. She had never let anyone close enough to notice she was tired. But F saw her the way light sees water, not trying to change it, just illuminating what was already there. He saw her intelligence and asked her opinion. He saw her sacrifice and never took it for granted. He saw her loneliness and sat beside it without trying to fix it. They fell in love the way tired people do, slowly, then all at once. Not with fireworks. With the quiet recognition of 2 people who had been searching for each other in a city that felt too big and too cold. They met on a winter afternoon in Minneapolis, when the snow was falling in patient threads and people wrapped their mouths with scarves to speak. But by spring, when the snow melted and the city learned to breathe again, he asked her to marry him. Not on one knee. Not with a ring that caught light. They were in his apartment, the one with 2 roommates, the one that smelled like instant noodles and possibility. They were lying on his mattress that dipped in the middle, her head on his chest, his fingers threading through her hair. Marry me, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a plea, a promise, a proposal all at once. She pulled back to look at him. You have a ring? No. You have a plan? No. You have savings? He laughed. Almost none. She smiled. Then yes. Absolutely yes. They married a week later at City Hall. 2 friends as witnesses. A clerk with kind eyes who understood that love didn't need pageantry to be real. F wore a borrowed suit. She wore a white dress from a thrift store. They exchanged rings that didn't flash, just simple bands that cost $40 each and meant everything. In the courthouse hallway, he kissed her forehead first, tasting the salt of her skin. Then her mouth, slow and careful, as if he were learning a language he loved and wanted to speak for the rest of his life. No hurry, he whispered between kisses. We have time. For 3 months, they were a small, private happiness. He worked. She worked. They built a life out of ordinary moments, cooking dinner in his small kitchen, walking through the park, holding hands under blankets, dreaming about futures that felt both impossible and inevitable. But she began to notice things. A phone call where he switched to a language she didn't recognize. His voice changed, tense, clipped, nothing like the gentle man who hummed while cooking. He stepped onto their balcony in spring, when the world was thawing, and spoke in urgent tones to someone named Uncle. When he came back inside, his smile was arranged like a mask he'd learned to wear quickly. What is it? She asked. He kissed her hair. My cousin. He's ill. Do we need to send money? He hesitated. 1 second too long. Just enough time for a lie to stitch itself clean. No. She didn't believe him. But she wanted to. So she chose to. A week later, he told her he needed to go home. Just for a bit. His mother was getting older. There were things he had to take care of. Business. Arrangements. The kind of vague explanations that usually meant something was very wrong or very hidden. Come with me, he said, and the way hope moved through his voice made something in her chest unfold like a flower opening to sun. We'll have our own quiet. No noise of screens. Just wind. Just fields. Just us. She looked at this man, this gentle, brilliant man who had taught her what it meant to rest, and she didn't see the lie yet. She only saw the possibility. She gave her notice at the hospital. 2 weeks. The head nurse hugged her and said, You're making a brave choice. She didn't know how brave. She didn't know it was brave at all, she only knew it felt necessary, the way love sometimes does. She gave notice at the diner. She folded her uniform for the last time, the one stained with coffee and scrambled eggs and the everyday poetry of service. She hugged the other waiters. They gave her a card they'd all signed. She cried reading it in her car. She went to her apartment and began the process of dismantling a life. She sold her car, the one she'd paid off in installments over 5 years. She kept the leather keychain with her initials because it fit in her palm and felt like proof that she'd existed somewhere. She boxed her winter coat and shipped it to her cousin in Wisconsin with a note, "In case I need to remember cold." She printed photographs. Her mother at her college graduation. Her best friend at nursing school. Herself as a child, small and certain. She packed them carefully, as if they might break. She had $400 in her savings account after paying for the plane ticket. She had a man who loved her, or so she believed, and the stubborn certainty that love was enough. On the night before her flight, she and F lay in bed, and he traced the burn scar on her forearm. The one from the milk steamer. The one that had started everything. "I hate that this hurt you," he whispered, the same words he'd said months ago. "It's just a mark," she said. "It's a map," he replied, almost to himself. "Where we began." She fell asleep believing him. She fell asleep believing in the future he'd promised. She fell asleep not knowing that maps can be drawn in lies as easily as they can be drawn in truth. The village had a single sugar-white church, a mechanic's yard full of coughing cars, and a primary school where chalk dust rose like tired prayer. Their one-room house had a corrugated roof that sang in rain. The first week, her body complained loudly. Her palms split open. Her back spasmed. She cut her foot open on the lip of a hoe and bled into the seep of red soil. He held her ankle, cleaned it, and wrapped it in cloth that smelled faintly of kerosene. "Tell me when it hurts," he said. "It hurts now," she whispered. "Keep breathing into it." And she did. She breathed into the pain, into the sacrifice, into the slow realization that she had given up everything for a man who was still, somehow, a complete stranger. The corrugated roof sang in rain. The neighbors' goats bleated. The nights were thick with insects and mystery. She worked in fields with women who didn't quite trust her. She cooked over a fire that bit her fingers. She hauled water from a well that felt infinite and empty. And in the dark, on a mattress that sank like an old promise, F made love to her with a gentleness that felt like apology. Like he was sorry for something she still didn't understand. The water well was 1/2 kilometer away. She measured distance now not in miles but in the ache it took to get there. The bucket was clay, heavy when empty, unbearable when full. The rope was frayed, biting grooves into her palms that deepened each day. Other women came at dawn, women with skin darkened by decades of sun, women who balanced full buckets on their heads with the ease of people born to burden, women who watched her with the kind of curiosity reserved for things that didn't belong. She was the foreigner. The American. The pale woman with the accent that turned their language into something uncertain, as if she were asking permission to speak it. They whispered behind their hands. She could hear the words even when they were quiet. Why would she come here? Why would she leave comfort for suffering? She didn't have an answer. Or rather, she had one, his name was F, but it felt smaller every day. The first morning she went to the well alone, she nearly collapsed. The bucket filled, she gripped it, and her arms trembled under the weight. An older woman, one with eyes like burnished copper and a wrapper the color of sunset, took the other side without asking. Together, they carried it to their small house, water sloshing, her muscles screaming. "You must become strong," the woman said. "The village does not soften for strangers." She was strong. She'd worked 12-hour hospital shifts. She'd carried patients. She'd lifted her own weight in struggle and survived. But this was a different kind of strong. This was the kind that came from waking at 4 a.m. to start fires. From bending over soil until your spine forgot its name. From accepting that your body would hurt because there was no other option. By the second week, her palms had formed blisters. By the third week, the blisters had hardened into calluses. By the first month, she didn't recognize her own hands anymore. They were darker, rougher, marked by work that had no clock and no reward except survival. The market was where women gathered, where news traveled faster than wind. She went once a week to buy yams and cassava, to exchange coins for vegetables, to exist in the economy of the village. The women's eyes tracked her. Their voices lowered. She heard fragments, whispered assessments of her worth, her strangeness, her inexplicable presence in their village. She doesn't know how to tie a wrapper properly. Her skin is too pale. She looks sick. Why does she smile so much? Nobody here smiles. Her husband is quiet. Too quiet. There is something hidden in that one. She learned not to defend herself. She learned to smile anyway. She learned to tie her wrapper tighter, to grind cassava with more intention, to work harder to prove her belonging even though she would never truly belong. One woman, the one with the copper eyes from the well, began to soften. She showed her how to cook cassava leaf stew, how to predict rain by the way the birds flew, how to rest her tired feet in cooler soil. She never asked questions. She only offered knowledge, the way old women do. "You love him very much," she said one afternoon, not as a question. "Yes," she answered. "Enough to stay?" She looked at her hands, rough, dark, transformed. "Yes," she said again. The old woman nodded, as if this answered something deeper than the word suggested. She found it on accident. The house had a loose board in the corner, the kind the rats used as highways. She was sweeping, her morning ritual, her way of maintaining some order in a space that seemed designed to resist it, when the broom caught the board and lifted it. A small black phone fell out, thinner and sleeker than the cheap device F kept visible on the table. Her heart stopped. She picked it up. The screen glowed with messages, rapid-fire, urgent, in English and Yoruba mixed together. Words like shipment, delivery, Lagos, board approval, quarterly projections. A name that appeared over and over, Chief Okafor. She didn't understand. But she understood enough to know that this phone didn't belong to a mechanic. This phone belonged to someone important. Someone living a life that had nothing to do with cassava fields and wells. She heard him coming, the sound of his motorcycle, the crunch of gravel. She shoved the phone back, replaced the board, and tried to breathe like someone who hadn't just discovered a lie. He came in with grease on his wrists and exhaustion in his eyes. He washed at the bucket, his head bent, his movements slow. Later, after they'd eaten rice and stew, after the sun had collapsed into darkness, he stepped outside. She watched from the window as he retrieved the phone, as he spoke in urgent tones to someone he called uncle, as his jaw worked with tension she'd never seen before. When he returned to bed, she pretended to be asleep. He lay beside her with his eyes open, staring at something only he could see. She felt the distance between them, not physical, but real. A distance made of secrets. A distance that grew wider every time he disappeared. "I have to go to the city for work," he said one morning, not meeting her eyes. "Work?" she asked. "I thought you worked at the mechanic's yard." "Side work," he said quickly. "Consulting. Nothing important." But he left at dawn and didn't return until midnight. His phone buzzed constantly, calls he took outside, conversations conducted in hushed tones. She sat alone in their small house, waiting. She fetched water, made dinner, cleaned, and waited. She watched the light change from gold to orange to purple to black, and she waited. This happened 3 times a week. Sometimes more. "I'm sorry," he would say, returning to find her awake, her eyes red from crying she thought she'd hidden. "I know this is hard." "Then tell me what's happening," she would beg. "Tell me the truth." He would kiss her forehead, or her hair, or her mouth, never her eyes. Always he kissed her instead of answering. And she let him, because his kisses felt like apology, and she was desperate enough to accept apology for the sin of lying. The monsoon rains came heavy that month. The roof drummed all night, water finding cracks, dripping onto their mattress. They huddled under a thin blanket, listening to the storm rage outside, wrapped in each other like people drowning together. "Do you regret it?" he asked suddenly, his voice barely louder than the rain. "Coming here? Leaving everything?" She pulled back to look at his face. In the darkness, she could barely see him, just the shape of him, the familiar ache of his presence. "No," she said, and she meant it. "Even like this. Even in poverty. Even with you gone all the time." She took a breath. "I would still choose you." She felt him tense. She felt the moment the words hit him, the moment he understood that she was offering him something he didn't deserve. Forgiveness for crimes he hadn't confessed. Love despite deception she still didn't fully understand. "You shouldn't," he whispered. "You should leave. Go back to America. Go back to your life." "I don't want to leave," she said. "I want you to tell me the truth." I want her voice broke. "I want to know who you are. All of you. Not just the man in the village. The other one. The one who makes those calls." He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. The rain drummed on. The darkness pressed down. She could feel his heart beating under her palm fast, afraid, alive with something he couldn't name. Then he kissed her. Not on the mouth first. On her forehead, tasting the salt of her skin. Then on her cheekbones, where tears had left trails. Then on her lips, slow and careful, as if each kiss were an apology and a plea and a question all at once. "Are we still us?" his mouth asked. "Yes," her body answered, pulling him closer, accepting the kiss instead of the truth because the kiss felt like something real in a world built on lies. He made love to her that night with a tenderness that bordered on desperation. His hands learned her again, as if he'd forgotten the map of her. His breath hitched when she whispered his name. He held her afterward like someone holding something fragile that might break if released. "I'm sorry," he said into the dark. "For so much." "Then tell me," she pleaded. "Tell me what you're sorry for." But he only held her tighter, and eventually she fell asleep to the sound of rain, to the rhythm of his heartbeat, to the knowledge that she was loving a man she didn't fully know. The next morning, he was gone before dawn. She found a note on the table in his careful handwriting. "I love you. That is the only truth I know how to tell." She held the note and wept, not from anger, but from the terrible clarity that love and honesty are not always the same thing. That you can give everything to someone and still be holding back from the most important truth of all. Outside, the village was waking. Women were heading to the well. The goat was bleating its morning complaint. The sun was rising over fields that had consumed her palms and her strength and her old life. And she was still here. Still choosing him. Still waiting for him to choose her, not the version of her that worked in fields, but the whole version, the one that deserved the truth. The morning was green and humming. Rain had fallen all night, the kind that washes the world clean and then leaves it gasping. The roof had drummed its metal song. She and F had held each other through the drum roll, her back pressed to his chest, his arm wrapped around her like he was afraid she might float away. When she woke, he was already gone. A note on the table, "City today. Back late. Love you." She didn't question it anymore. The disappearances had become routine. She had learned to stop asking where he went, who he met, what business required him to wear a face she didn't recognize. She had learned to accept apology disguised as kisses. She had learned to swallow her own need for truth. The cassava fields were calling. Her shift started at dawn, joining the other women in the red soil, digging, hauling, her hands now permanent maps of labor. She wrapped her cloth around her waist, tied it tight, and was reaching for her sandals when she saw it. The wallet. Brown leather. Expensive. Sitting on the kitchen table like an animal that had wandered in from somewhere wild. She picked it up. Her first thought was to run after him, to catch him before the motorbike disappeared down the red dirt road. But something made her hesitate. Something whispered to open it. To look inside. She told herself it was practical. She told herself she was checking for identification. She told herself she had a right to know. The truth was, she was desperate to know. Inside, a leather card holder. A stack of pristine business cards with embossed lettering. F. Okafor. Chief Executive Officer. Strategic Logistics and Shipping Solutions. A company logo she didn't recognize. A phone number that started with the country code for Nigeria, then Lagos. Below that, an address in Victoria Island. The expensive part of the city. The part where glass towers caught sunlight and threw it back at the poor like an insult. Her hands started shaking. She pulled out more. A bank check made out to Okafor Family Holdings. The amount was so large the zeros seemed to multiply like an accusation. A foreign card, sleek metal, black, with his name embossed in letters that caught the light. An ID badge with his photograph. In the photo, he wore a suit. In the photo, he looked like a different man. A man with power. A man with secrets. A man she didn't know. At the bottom of the wallet, a photograph. The glass building from the hidden phone screen. The building with mirrored windows that reflected nothing but wealth. She sat down very slowly on the edge of their sagging bed. The wallet felt heavy in her hands. Heavy with lies. Heavy with the weight of months spent in fields while he conducted business in towers. Heavy with the crushing realization that she had given up everything for someone who had given her nothing but fragments and kisses instead of truth. She washed her face. She changed into the wrapper she wore to the city, the one that was less faded, that didn't have quite as many stains. She braided her hair as best she could. She looked in the broken mirror and saw a woman who looked like she didn't belong anywhere. Not in the village. Not in this life. Certainly not in the world that wallet represented. She took the bus at noon. The driver was a man with tobacco-stained teeth and a radio that played music too loud. The bus was packed, farmers heading to market, traders with goods stacked on laps, children pressed against mothers. Through the open windows, the countryside became the outskirts of the city. The red soil turned to asphalt. The huts became concrete buildings. The poverty became a different kind of poverty, the kind that lived in the shadow of glass towers. A woman next to her wrinkled her nose. Another woman whispered something to her friend, and both of them looked at her, At her wrapper, at her sandals, at the way the dust of the field still clung to her skin despite washing. She heard a word, village woman, like it was an insult. Like it was contagious. She kept her eyes forward. She kept her dignity like a cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. The bus finally deposited her on a street of impossibility. Glass towers reached toward clouds. Cars passed that cost more than lifetimes of labor. Women in pencil skirts and high heels moved like they owned the sidewalk. Men in expensive suits spoke into phones without looking at anything real. Everyone moved with the certainty of people who belonged. She stood on the corner, the wallet in her hand, and felt the full weight of her own insignificance. The building was exactly as she'd imagined. Mirrored windows that threw the sun back at the world. A lobby of such bright whiteness it made her eyes hurt. Marble floors so polished they looked like water. Security guards in uniforms that cost more than her medical degree. She pushed through the revolving doors. The cold hit her first, air conditioning so aggressive it felt like punishment. The marble floor so white it made her feel like a stain. People moving around her in rivers of purpose, parting instinctively as if her presence might dirty something. She approached the security desk. "I'm here to return my husband's wallet," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. The guard looked up. His eyes traveled across her, the wrapper, the worn sandals, the way dust still clung to the hem. His expression shifted. "Whose wallet?" he asked, as if this was a question with only one obvious answer. "My husband's." The receptionist glanced over. A man in a blazer paused his conversation. Someone raised a phone. "His name?" the guard asked, his tone now carrying the weight of someone about to deliver judgment. She gave him the village name. The one his mother called him. The one the elders knew. Nothing. No recognition. Just the slow bloom of condescension across the guard's face. "I have his other name," she said quietly, and gave it, the name from the card, the one that belonged to the man in the suit, the one that seemed to belong to a version of F she'd never met. The lobby froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The receptionist's mouth opened. The guard's posture changed, suddenly deferential, suddenly careful. A woman in a pencil skirt's eyes flashed with something alive and knowing. People exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "Record her." "Who are you to him?" the guard asked carefully. "His wife," she said. The room erupted. Laughter filled the space like a virus. It had mass. It had teeth. Phones rose like weapons. A woman in a pencil skirt leaned against a man in a blazer, both of them pressing their lips together to contain their amusement. Someone touched her hair. Someone tugged at the hem of her wrapper. "This is a professional environment," the guard said, his voice now rehearsed and remote. "Please stand and exit the premises." But she didn't leave. She couldn't. She knelt, slowly, deliberately, on the cold marble floor. She held the wallet up like it was a holy relic, like it might speak for her, like it might explain something that words couldn't contain. "I only want to return his wallet," she said, and her voice was steady even as tears began to fall. "I came a long way." More laughter. More phones. More evidence that she didn't belong here. That she would never belong here. That the woman she had become in the fields, strong and dark and simple, was the wrong kind of woman for a man who lived in towers. She knelt on the marble and felt the cold burn through the thin wrapper into her knees. She held the wallet like it was the last thing tethering her to understanding. Around her, people recorded, whispered, judged. Above her, she could feel the weight of the building itself, all that glass and steel and expensive air conditioning, pressing down on her small, impossible frame. "My husband is here," she said to anyone who would listen. "Somewhere in this building. I know he is." The security guard stepped forward to physically remove her when the elevator dinged. Footsteps. Quick, purposeful. The kind that made people turn. The kind that commanded the air to rearrange itself. When he emerged, the lobby fell into a tense hush. He wore a suit the color of smoke. His jaw was set tight. His eyes were the eyes of a man whose worst fear had just materialized in the lobby of his own building. And in that moment, as he looked at her kneeling on the cold marble, surrounded by people laughing, holding his wallet like evidence, she understood. Everything had been a lie. Not just the hidden phone. Not just the disappearances. The entire life she thought they were building together. The entire foundation of their marriage. All of it, constructed on deception so complete that she had become a joke in the place where his real life lived. He looked at her, and she saw it in his face, the moment he realized that the two worlds he'd kept so carefully separated had finally collided, and there was nowhere left for either of them to hide. The security guard's hand was rough on her shoulder. Stand up and leave, madam, he said, his voice rehearsed and remote. This is not a marketplace. Stop dragging drama into a corporate building. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her knees had become part of the marble, cold, unyielding, permanent. Around her, the lobby pulsed with a hunger that felt almost predatory. Phones rose higher. Whispers multiplied. Someone laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the air like broken glass. Please, she said again, and the single word hurt more than the physical pain radiating from her knees. I only want to return his wallet. Whose wallet? The receptionist asked, her smile now a knife. Your husband's? Which husband? She glanced at the people around her, and laughter erupted, the kind that feeds on itself, growing louder, more vicious. Everyone knows F's wife is in London. She's meeting with the board next week. The words landed like a fist. Wife. In London. Meeting with the board. The lobby tilted. She gripped the wallet tighter, but her hands had gone numb. Around her, people's expressions shifted from amusement to something uglier, the fascination people have with tragedy, the hunger to watch someone break. Then she appeared. A woman in a pencil skirt so sharp it could cut, hair flipped back with the precision of someone who'd practiced the gesture in mirrors. Her eyes were the color of a predator's, intelligent, cruel, and intimately familiar with F. She walked toward the kneeling woman with the confidence of someone who had claimed territory. Oh my God, the woman said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You actually thought you were married to him. She crouched down, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown. Sweetheart, F doesn't marry village girls. He marries women of substance. Women who understand the world. Women who, she paused, her eyes traveling across the wrapper, the dust, the exhausted face. Women who aren't this. She gestured, and her fingernail, painted a shade of red that looked like blood, caught the light. I know him, the woman continued, her voice dropping to something more intimate. I know him very well, actually. We've been together for 3 years. He visits me in Lagos every weekend. She smiled. He's never once mentioned you. The lobby held its breath. She felt something break inside her chest, not suddenly, but in slow motion, like ice fracturing under spring. Tears came without permission. Her hands trembled. The wallet fell from her fingers and scattered across the marble, cards sliding, the check fluttering, the photo of the building tumbling like evidence. He lied to you, the woman said, standing up, brushing her skirt as if touching something unclean. That's what men like F do. They collect women like experiences. Village. City. Foreign. It doesn't matter. They're all the same to him, temporary entertainment. People laughed harder. Someone shouted, is she crying? Another voice, oh God, record this. A woman whispered, that's so sad, but her phone was already up, capturing every tear, every tremor. She tried to stand. Her right knee screamed, pain that reminded her of the fields, of the well, of the months she'd spent transforming her body into something strong enough to love him. She swayed. Her vision blurred. The lobby became a carousel of faces, all watching, all judging, all hungry for her humiliation. Please stop, she whispered. Nobody stopped. The guard grabbed her arm. You need to leave. Now. My husband. Is not your husband, the woman in the pencil skirt interrupted, her laugh like shattered glass. That's what you still don't understand. He was never yours. He was just playing a game, and you were stupid enough to believe it. The words landed in a specific order that broke her in a specific way. Stupid. Believer. Game. Played. She had left her country. Her job. Her career. Her mother. Everything. For a game. She fell to her knees again, not deliberately, but because her body could no longer pretend to be strong. And then. Silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that silenced everything else. A shift in the air. A change in the room's energy like when a predator enters and prey freeze. The elevator doors opened. Footsteps. Not hurried. Deliberate. The kind of footsteps that belong to someone used to commanding space. He emerged in a tailored suit the color of smoke, surrounded by men in dark glasses who moved with the coordinated precision of security trained for violence. His expression was composed, but his jaw worked, and his eyes were on fire. The woman in the pencil skirt froze mid-laugh. He walked across the marble floor, and people parted instinctively. He approached the kneeling woman without hesitation, without performance. He simply looked down at her with eyes that held an ocean of feeling he couldn't afford to show. Stop recording, he said to the crowd, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Delete everything. Now. Hands lowered slowly. Phones disappeared. Faces rearranged themselves into expressions of fear. He knelt, not in apology, not in performance, but in a gesture so intimate it made the entire lobby hold its breath. He lifted her face gently, his thumb brushing away tears. When he spoke, his voice trembled in a way that shattered the image of the powerful man everyone had just witnessed. "She is my wife," he said, and the words were a declaration and a plea and a confession all at once. "This is my wife. And you," he turned to the security guard, the receptionist, the people who had laughed. "You have all just committed a serious offense." The guard's face went pale. "Sir, we didn't know." "Didn't know?" F's voice cracked like a whip. "Or didn't care?" He stood slowly, never taking his eyes off his wife. "You're fired. All of you. Security, receptionist, everyone who participated in this. You have 1 hour to remove your belongings from this building." The woman in the pencil skirt tried to smile, a gesture that died halfway across her face. "I can explain." He looked at her like she was something he'd accidentally stepped on. "You were fired 3 months ago, Ms. Adeyemi. I'm not sure why you're still in this building." Security, he didn't need to finish. The guards moved, and she was escorted out with a dignity she didn't deserve. He turned back to his wife and offered his hand. "Please," he said softly. "Let me help you up." She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She looked at the power he wore like a second skin and the lie he'd wrapped around her entire life. She shook her head and stood on her own, wincing as pain shot through her bruised knee. Around them, the lobby had become a tomb of silence. "Come upstairs," he said gently. "Please. Let me explain." "No," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears still falling. "Here is fine. Here is where you brought me. In front of strangers. In front of your real life." "This is not my real life," he said desperately. "You are. The village is. Us is." "Then why did she know you?" she asked, and her voice cracked. "Why did she say 3 years? Why did she say you visit every weekend?" He opened his mouth. Closed it. The lie died before it could be born. "I was afraid," he whispered. "Afraid of what?" She laughed, and it sounded like something breaking. "Afraid that I would see you? Afraid that I would know who you really are? Afraid that you would stop loving me if you knew," he said, and the confession was so raw, so honest, so utterly inadequate that it broke something in her chest all over again. She held up the wallet. It was still clutched in her hand, worn from her grip. "This is what I came to return," she said. "I thought if I returned it, if I came to this place and explained, there would be a simple answer. A misunderstanding. A mistake." She opened it, pulled out the company ID. "But this isn't a mistake. This is a choice. You chose to live a double life. You chose to let me suffer in that village. You chose to let people mock me. You chose to hide." He stepped toward her. I know, and I'm sorry." "Sorry is not enough," she said, backing away from him. People were still watching, the drama unfolding like a television show playing live. "Sorry is what you say when you spill coffee. This is worse. This is." Her voice gave out. Her body shook. The adrenaline that had carried her this far evaporated, leaving her hollow and exhausted. The marble floor suddenly felt even colder than before. He didn't reach for her again. He simply stood there, in his expensive suit, surrounded by his power and his wealth and his complete inability to undo what he'd done. Around them, the lobby had become a cathedral of judgment. Everyone watching. Everyone knowing the truth now. Everyone bearing witness to the moment a marriage revealed itself as a beautiful, intricate lie. "I came to return your wallet," she said finally, dropping it at his feet. "I've returned it. Now I'm going back." "Back where?" he asked, his voice breaking. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw both the man from the diner and the CEO in the suit, all at once. And she understood that he had never been either. He had been both and neither. He had been a lie told so convincingly that even he believed it. "I don't know," she said. "Anywhere but here." She turned and walked toward the revolving doors. Every step hurt. Every step felt like leaving something behind. The lobby parted for her the way it had when he arrived, but this time, she was leaving alone. Behind her, she heard him call her name. Once. Twice. A third time, breaking on the vowels. She didn't look back. She made it 3 steps toward the revolving doors before he caught up. Not physically, he didn't grab her or pull her back. But his voice, when he spoke her name, held such raw desperation that her feet stopped moving of their own accord. Around them, the lobby had become a theater of witnesses. Every eye tracked her. Every phone, despite his orders, was recording again. "Please," he said, and the word was a weapon that cut both ways. "Please. Just hear me. Just 5 minutes." She didn't turn around. She couldn't trust what her face would reveal. She couldn't afford to show him the war happening inside her, the part that wanted to leave forever at war with the part that had already forgiven him without meaning to. "Not here," she said quietly, speaking to the glass doors instead of to him. "Not in front of these people." He nodded, though she couldn't see it. She felt it, a shift in the air, a weight lifted. "My office. Top floor. Please." The elevator ride was silent. They stood on opposite sides of the metal box, not touching, barely breathing. The numbers climbed: 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. On the 20th floor, the doors opened to a space that looked like the inside of a ship's eye. Glass everywhere. The city spread out below like a kingdom he owned. River shining like a kept promise. Windows so clean they looked like air itself had been polished. She limped across the threshold. Her right knee throbbed with each step, a constant reminder of the marble floor, of the humiliation, of the moment she understood that everything had been constructed on sand. "Sit," he said gently, gesturing to a chair that was probably worth more than everything she owned. She didn't sit. She stood by the window and looked out at the city, the place where he lived a life she didn't know. The place where another woman had known him in ways she never would. The place where he had built an empire while she built calluses in cassava fields. "Talk," she said. He moved to the window but didn't stand too close. He kept a distance between them, respectful, careful, as if he knew that his presence was a thing to be negotiated now. "My father died when I was 12, he began, and his voice was the voice of someone who had rehearsed this confession many times in his head. "After that, everything changed. My mother became both parents. My uncles became vultures. The family business became a cage." He paused. "By the time I was 20, the board had already chosen a wife for me. Not a person. A strategic advantage. Her family controlled shipping routes. My family controlled cold storage. Together, we would control the coast." She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the city. "I refused," he continued. "I left Nigeria and told everyone I was going to study. What I really did was run. I studied because I needed to understand the business well enough to refuse it, but I studied because I needed to disappear." He swallowed. "Then I met you." She felt his gaze on her back, heavy, desperate, seeking absolution. "When I met you," he said, "I felt small for the first time in years. I felt like a man, not an inheritance. I felt like someone picked you because of me, not because of what I could give you. I wanted to preserve that feeling. I wanted to keep you in a place where my name didn't open doors, where my money didn't matter, where you could love me without the weight of everything else." "So you lied," she said flatly. "You tested me." "Yes," he whispered. "I tested you. To see if you would stay when things were hard. To see if you would leave when you discovered the truth. I was terrified that everyone would use me, just like my family does. Just like the board does. Just like I would." She turned to face him finally. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice was steady. "You tested love, and failed it. Because love isn't a test. Love is trust. And you gave me none." He flinched as if physically struck. "I left my entire life," she said, and each word was a hammer blow. "My mother. My career. My home. My country. I left it all because you asked me to. Because you told me we would build something real in the village. And you were building this," she gestured at the office, the city, the life he'd hidden. "The entire time. You were building a lie." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Stop apologizing." Her voice cracked. "Apologies don't fix anything. You can't apologize for 6 months of betrayal. You can't apologize for letting me kneel on marble in front of strangers. You can't apologize for making me feel like I was insane for thinking I knew you." She moved to his desk and gripped the edge. Her knee throbbed. The pain was almost welcome, it gave her something physical to hold onto while her emotional world collapsed. "That woman," she said quietly. "The one in the pencil skirt. How long?" 3 months, he said. "And I ended it 2 months ago. Before we married. I ended everything the moment. The moment you didn't think I would find out, she finished for him. Not because you wanted to be faithful, but because you were afraid of being caught. He stood there, and she could see the weight of his secrets pressing down on him, the weight she had been carrying alone while he lived in two worlds, stepping between them as easily as changing clothes. I can't do this, she said suddenly. I can't be in a room with you right now. Then go, he said, and the words were an invitation to leave forever. If that's what you need, go. But please, he held up his hands, showing her they were empty. Not like this. Not in anger. Not with us broken. We were never whole, she said. You made sure of that. But she didn't leave the building. Instead, as the sun began its descent toward evening, he drove her to a place from his childhood, a quiet warehouse by the river, old bricks and ropes, the smell of salt and aged wood. The same warehouse she'd watched him in during their early days, the place where he said he came to hide from the weight of his own name. The sun was setting when they arrived, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple and red, the colors of morning and beauty mixed together. She sat on a stack of pallets. He stood at a distance, respecting the space between them like it was holy ground. I need you to understand something, she said, her voice soft but cutting. Love doesn't exist in halves. You can't love me in the village and another woman in the city. You can't love me with truth and then hide behind lies. Love is all or nothing. It's complete surrender or it's nothing at all. I know, he whispered. And you brought me here, she continued, to this warehouse where you hid as a boy. You brought me to the place where you felt safe escaping yourself. But I don't want to escape you. I want to know you. All of you. Not the filtered version. Not the version you think I can handle. The real version. He knelt then, not in the lobby where people watched, not in his office where success framed the walls. He knelt on the old wooden floor of the warehouse, surrounded by rope and memory and the sound of the river speaking its ancient language. I promise, he said, no more lies. No more hidden phones. No more secrets. If I have to spend the rest of my life proving this to you, I will. Because the alternative is losing you, and I can't. His voice broke completely. I can't exist in a world where you're gone. She looked at him, this man who had lied, who had hidden, who had tested her love and found it stronger than he deserved. This man who was terrified of being loved for his money because he'd never been loved for anything else. This man who had learned to give affection instead of honesty because affection felt safer than vulnerability. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. Forgiveness would take time. But she stood, slowly, wincing as pain shot through her knee, and extended her hand. He took it like it was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. They stood together as the river spoke its dark language and the sky darkened from gold to purple to the blue-black of night. The moon emerged, silver and patient, and cast their shadows long across the warehouse floor. Two silhouettes, separate and together, broken and beginning to heal. I'm going back to the village tomorrow, she said. Alone. His hand tightened, but he didn't argue. I need to think, she continued. I need to understand who I am without you. I left my entire life in America to be with you. Then I left my American self in the village to survive with you. I don't know who I am anymore. I need to find her. How long? He asked. I don't know. Will you come back? She looked at the river, the water that had carried ships, that had carried prayers, that had carried the weight of generations. If you can learn to be honest, she said, then yes. I will come back. He pulled her into an embrace then, not as a lover, but as someone holding something precious and fragile. She let her head rest against his chest and felt his heart beating under her ear, steady, afraid, alive with the terrible knowledge that he had almost lost her. They stood like that under the moonlight while the river counted with its own ancient syllables. Not a resolution. Not a happily ever after. But a beginning. A moment where two broken people decided that perhaps they could be remade together, if they were brave enough to stop hiding. In the distance, a ship's horn sounded, a lonely, beautiful wail that echoed across water and time. I love you, he whispered into her hair. That's the only truth I know how to tell right now. But I will learn the others. She didn't answer. She only held him tighter, and let the river carry her thoughts toward whatever came next. The door opened before he could knock. His mother stood in the threshold, a woman with silver threaded through her hair, hands that had sold fish at markets for decades, eyes that had learned to read truth the way other people read books. She looked at her son first, then at the woman beside him. Her expression shifted from curiosity to recognition to something that made her eyes fill with tears. Come, she said simply, and stepped aside. The house by the river smelled like home in a way their small room in the village never had. It smelled like cassava roots and palm oil and the particular warmth of a place where love had been served daily for years. The mother moved through it with the grace of someone who had learned to turn survival into grace. She sat them at a wooden table that bore the marks of thousands of meals. She prepared food without speaking, fish wrapped in leaves, cassava that melted like history, plantain fried the way F had once told her his mother made it. As they ate, she watched them. Not judging. Simply observing, the way mothers do when they're trying to understand what their children have become. Finally, when the plates were empty and the silence had grown full, she spoke. My son, she said, her voice carrying the weight of years and wisdom, left this village believing that love was something to be protected. That secrets kept people safe. That hiding was a form of care. She paused, her old hands folding together on the table. But I taught him wrong, I think. Or he learned it wrong. F's jaw tightened. Mother. She held up one hand. Let me finish. A lie, even told for love, will one day need truth to feed it. And when truth finally arrives, it arrives like a storm. It destroys everything you tried to build in silence. She looked at her son with eyes that held centuries of disappointment and endless grace. You have brought shame to this house not through your wealth, but through your deception. She turned to the woman kneeling across from her. And you, she said, her voice softening, have shown more strength than my son deserves. But strength without forgiveness becomes hardness. Forgiveness without memory becomes foolishness. You must find the balance between them. Tears ran down the woman's face. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can, the mother said. Because you are already trying. Over the following weeks, he began the work of rebuilding, not just their marriage, but the life he'd constructed on deception. He brought her to a private clinic in the city, where a specialist examined her knee. The damage wasn't permanent, but it would take time. Physical therapy. Rest. The doctor looked at F with barely concealed judgment as he explained the injury. Kneeling on marble, the impact, the way pain had radiated through her entire body. This kind of trauma, the doctor said carefully, is about more than the physical wound. F nodded. He understood. He bought land in the village, 5 acres of rich soil with a natural spring. He brought architects and engineers from the city. Together, they built a cooperative farm with tools that didn't bite, a water system that didn't require hauling, and education programs where farming women could learn new techniques. He did this without fanfare. No press releases. No cameras. Just the quiet work of a man trying to undo damage he couldn't fully erase. He attended the village church on a Sunday morning, something he'd never done before. He stood in front of the congregation, his expensive suit looking out of place among the worn cloth and simple colors, and he spoke. I have lied to this community, he said, his voice steady but soft. I came here under false pretenses. I hid who I was because I was afraid of being seen. I hurt a woman who deserved honesty, and I hurt myself by denying truth. He paused. I cannot undo these things. But I can acknowledge them. And I can commit to building something better with the resources I have been given. The village listened. People whispered. Some nodded. Some turned away. Forgiveness, he learned, is not something that comes quickly or easily. But she noticed. She noticed the way he held her now, as if her body was something precious and fragile. She noticed the way he asked before touching her. She noticed the way his eyes sought hers, always seeking permission, always checking to see if she was still there. One evening, a week after they'd returned to the village, he prepared the room with a care that made her chest ache. Candles placed on every surface, casting the small space in dancing shadows. Flowers woven through the rafters, simple white flowers from the market, nothing expensive, nothing performative. A cloth laid on the floor, soft, clean, kind. She understood what he was asking without words. Dance with me, he said, extending his hand. She took it. There was no music except the sound of crickets outside and the gentle wind moving through the corrugated roof. They moved slowly in the candlelight, not the frantic passion of people trying to prove something, but the tender negotiation of two people learning each other again. His hands found the places where pain still lived, her bruised knee, her rough palms, her shoulder where tension lived like a permanent guest. He touched each place with reverence, as if he were asking forgiveness from every cell in her body. I'm sorry, he whispered against her hair. I'm so sorry. She didn't answer with words. She answered by leaning into him, by letting her body soften against his, by allowing herself to be held by the man who had broken her trust and was now trying, with painful sincerity, to earn it back. They made love slowly, not with the urgency of newlyweds or the thoughtless passion of people certain of each other. They made love like people rebuilding a house room by room, checking every foundation, testing every wall. His touch was a question. Her response was an answer. Back and forth, careful and honest and terrifying. When it was finished, they lay together in the candlelight, their bodies curved like pages in an open book. "I forgive you," she said softly, tracing patterns on his chest. "But I will never forget. The moment you kneel on marble will live in me forever. The woman in the pencil skirt will live in me. The lie will live in me." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "I know. And that's right. That's how it should be." He kissed her bruised knee, the one that still ached on cold mornings, the physical reminder of what his lies had cost. He kissed the scar on her foot where the hoe had cut weeks after she arrived. He kissed the calluses on her palms, maps of labor, histories of sacrifice. "These scars," he said, "are more beautiful than any perfection could ever be. Because they tell the story of a woman who survived. A woman who loved enough to hurt. A woman who forgave enough to heal." She let him kiss her scars, and with each kiss, something inside her shifted. Not forgiveness, exactly, she would never fully erase the memory of kneeling on marble while strangers recorded her humiliation. But acceptance. The understanding that betrayal and love are not mutually exclusive. That a person can hurt you and still be worth loving. That trust, once broken, can be rebuilt if both people are willing to do the work. "What about your other life?" she asked as they lay in the darkness, the candles burned down to shadows. "The company. The boardroom. The glass towers." "I'm restructuring," he said. "I'm bringing in partners I trust. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations. I want to build something here instead. Something real. The farm cooperative. Starting with that. But also schools. Medical clinics. Infrastructure that actually serves people instead of extracting from them." He paused. "I want to use my wealth to build. Starting with that. But also schools. Medical clinics. Infrastructure that actually serves people instead of extracting from them." He paused. "I want to use my wealth to build something my father would have been proud of. Something that's not just about power or control." She was quiet for a long time. "And the woman in London?" "I ended that completely," he said. "Before I married you. Before the warehouse. I ended everything." "I believe you," she said, and she meant it. "But I will also verify it. Because I will never be naive again." "Good," he said. "You shouldn't be. Naivety is how I stole 6 months of your life." The crickets sang their night song. The candles had burned to nothing. The corrugated roof no longer seemed like a prison but like a shelter, simple, honest, real. She rested her head on his chest and felt his heart beating, steady, patient, learning how to be true. In the village, dawn came like a promise. The rooster called. The neighbor's goat bleated. The day began with the same simple rhythm it always had. But something had shifted. The space between them had closed. Not erased, there was still a scar there, visible if you looked closely, but healed enough to hold weight again. Forgiveness, she understood now, was not weakness. It was not giving in or giving up. It was the hardest kind of strength, the strength to look at someone who had hurt you and say, "I see what you've done, and I choose to stay." It was wisdom with memory. Power with compassion. And it was the only path forward that didn't end in bitterness. Outside, the village was waking. Women headed to the well. The market was opening. Life continued with its ordinary miracles. And inside their small room with the corrugated roof, two people who had learned to love in the ruins of their own deception held each other as the sun rose on a day that felt like a second chance. The revolving doors were the same. The marble floor was still white. The lobby still gleamed with the kind of polish that made ordinary people feel small. But everything had changed. She walked beside him with her head high, not arrogantly, but with the quiet certainty of someone who has survived being broken and chose to heal anyway. She wore a wrapper this time, traditional cloth tied with intention, not desperation. Her palms bore the calluses of labor, but they were also the hands of a woman who had built something real from the ruins of betrayal. The security guards straightened when they saw him approach. They bowed slightly, respect mixed with the memory of what had happened in this very space months ago. They looked at her with recognition now. Not mockery. Not laughter. Just acknowledgement of a woman who had knelt on their floor and emerged as a mountain. The receptionist smiled, a different smile than before. A smile that carried the weight of understanding what she had almost destroyed. Around them, the lobby was quiet. Nobody recorded. Nobody whispered. Nobody laughed. They moved through the space like a prayer answered. In the boardroom on the 20th floor, men in expensive suits stood to greet them. These were the architects of F's business, the people who had once seen her as a curiosity, a joke, a temporary distraction. Now they saw her as she truly was, the woman who had forced the CEO of their company to become honest. The woman who had demanded that power serve something larger than itself. He placed his hand on the small of her back, a gesture of intimacy and respect. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had nothing left to prove. "I want to introduce you to my wife. She is the founder and director of the Moji Foundation, a charity that provides education, healthcare, and economic opportunities to village women and girls across the region." The men nodded, impressed. They had seen the news. They had read the articles about the young American-Nigerian woman building schools in rural areas, training women in modern farming techniques, providing free medical clinics. They didn't know the full story, that these schools were built from the ashes of a lie, that this charity existed because a man had hidden his wealth and a woman had nearly died from the weight of his secrets. But she knew. "The foundation has already reached 5,000 women," she said, her voice steady and clear. "We're opening 3 more clinics next quarter, and we're establishing a scholarship program for girls. 50% of our board members are the village women we serve. This isn't charity, it's partnership." The men leaned forward, engaged. They saw potential. They saw profit margins and tax benefits. But she didn't care about their motivations. She cared about the women who would learn to read, who would receive medical treatment, who would have their daughters educated. As she spoke, her voice seemed to echo beyond the boardroom, speaking not just to these men, but to everyone who had laughed in that lobby, everyone who had doubted, everyone who had believed that worth could be measured in clothes and skin tone and accent. They laughed at her rags, not knowing Grace wore no diamonds. They mocked her face, not knowing beauty bows to truth. And they doubted her love, not knowing it was the richest thing in the room. The words floated like a prayer, an old African wisdom, a folktale moral, the kind of truth that had been passed down through generations by grandmothers who understood the human heart. A woman crossed an ocean not for gold, but for a man. A man hid his gold because he feared being loved for it. Love asked for truth, and truth arrived like a storm. But from the ruins of that storm, something real was built, not by the man's wealth, but by the woman's wisdom. She looked at F as the words echoed in her own mind. He was watching her with an expression that held the full weight of what had happened between them, the deception, the kneeling, the river warehouse, the candlelit forgiveness, the choice to rebuild. And the moral, dear listener, is this: that which is tested by fire either burns to ash or emerges stronger. Their love was tested. And it emerged as something that could change the world. After the meeting, as they walked through the hallway of glass and steel, F took her hand. "I want to show you something," he said. He led her to his private office, the one where he tried to explain himself months ago. But now it was different. The corporate coldness had been replaced with warmth. There were photographs on the walls, images of the villages they'd been building in, pictures of women at the clinic, children at the school, rows of newly planted crops. And in the center of the wall, a portrait. Not in traditional wrapper, but in both, the wrapper layered with professional clothes, standing in front of the school with village women on one side and international partners on the other. She looked strong. She looked whole. She looked like someone who had survived and thrived. "I want everyone who comes into this office to see you," he said. "Not as the woman who kneeled on marble, but as the woman who taught me the worth of truth." She touched the photograph, her own face looking back at her with wisdom she didn't know she possessed. "Do you ever regret," she asked softly, "losing the life you had? The simplicity?" "No," he said immediately. "Because that life wasn't real. This is. You are. Everything we're building together is." He paused. "Do you?" She thought of Minneapolis. Of the hospital shifts. Of the diner with the burned coffee. Of the woman she had been, comfortable but hollow, strong but alone. She thought of the village. Of the fields and the well and the woman with copper eyes who had taught her grace. She thought of the moment on marble, of the warehouse by the river, of the candlelit room where forgiveness had learned to walk on wounded knees. "No," she said. "Because I finally know who I am. I'm not the woman F built a lie around. I'm not the woman the lobby mocked. I'm the woman who survived both and built something that matters." That evening, they returned to their home in the village. The corrugated roof still sang when it rained. The neighbor's goat still bleated with its morning complaints. The well still waited for hands strong enough to carry water. But the house had changed. Books lined the shelves now, volumes on women's health, farming techniques, business development. There was a second room where she worked on grant proposals and partnership agreements. There was electricity running through solar panels F had installed. There was a kitchen with a gas stove, but she still kept the fire pit outside because some things, the taste of food cooked over flames, the ritual of gathering around heat, couldn't be replaced by convenience. They sat on the bench outside as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that had no names. Children from the village played in the distance. Women walked toward the well, their buckets catching the last light. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Her knee had healed, the doctor said the scar tissue would fade in time. But she kept the memory of it sharp. She kept the weight of that marble floor in her bones. May laughter never blind us from humility, she said softly. What? He asked. It's something I've been thinking about, she replied. The moral for all of this. Not just our story, but the moment in the lobby. The laughter. The recording. The mockery. It only happened because they were blinded by their own certainty. They were so convinced of their superiority that they couldn't see the humanity in me. She turned to look at him. And I almost fell into the same trap. I was so convinced that I had nothing, no money, no status, no belonging, that I believed their judgment was truth. But I had everything that mattered. I had integrity. I had love. I had the choice to keep believing in you even when you didn't believe in yourself. He kissed her forehead. You're wiser than all of them combined, he said. No, she replied gently. I'm just someone who has been broken and had to learn the difference between the pieces and the whole. Between pain and growth. Between forgiveness and naivety. The last light faded. Stars emerged like promises kept. A ship's horn sounded somewhere downriver, that lonely, beautiful call that had become their song. She stood and extended her hand. He took it, and they walked toward the house where candlelight was already burning in the windows, a home they had built together from the ashes of lies, now transformed into something real. Inside, they danced again in the flickering light, not to music, but to the rhythm of their own heartbeats. Two people who had learned to love not despite their scars, but because of them. Two people who had discovered that the richest love is the kind that survives being tested by fire. And so the woman who was laughed at became the teacher. The man who hid became the student. Together, they built a world where grace needed no diamonds, where beauty bowed to truth, and where love was recognized as the richest thing in any room. They did not live in the perfection of happiness ever after. They lived in the reality of daily choice, choosing honesty when silence was easier, choosing forgiveness when bitterness was justified, choosing love when doubt whispered its seductive lies. And in the village, in the city, in the spaces between luxury and poverty, their story became a story. Grandmothers told it to granddaughters. Mothers whispered it to daughters. Not as a fantasy, but as a map. A map that showed what love demands, what truth costs, and why both are worth the price. May laughter never blind us from humility. May wealth never blind us from worth. May pride never blind us from grace.